But here's the thing that was even more important. As the astronomers began to analyze the light coming from these distant galaxies, they discovered that nearly all of them were redshifted. The light was redshifted. Another illustration of this idea is remember the Doppler shift from high school science. Your science teacher may have told you about how the pitch of a train whistle will drop as the train recedes. And that's because the sound waves also stretch out as a result of a receding object.
But if it's coming at you,
the sound waves would bunch and the pitch would rise, or in the case of light, it would go to the violet end of the spectrum. But with the exceptions of some very, very close at hand galaxies, the galaxies throughout the universe are propagating light which is redshifted in relationship to us. And Hubble further found that the further away the galaxies are, the more redshifted the light is, the faster they're moving away from us. Now, the only way to explain that is with something like a roughly spherically symmetric expansion, like a balloon blowing up. And so the implication of the redshift evidence was that the universe is expanding outward in all directions of space in a spherically symmetric way. Now that's pretty mind-blowing. We live in an expanding universe, but then it gets even more intriguing when you begin to think in your mind's eye what the universe would have been like at any finite time in the past. If you go back 100 years.
If you roll it back.
Like those cartoons where suddenly they make everybody go backwards. So if you go back 100 years, the universe would have been smaller. Or 1,000 years, smaller, or 1,000,000 years, still smaller, or 1,000,000,000 years. However old you think the universe is, eventually you're going to go back to a point where that expansion would have had to start. You can't back extrapolate any further. There's a beginning point to the expansion, and arguably, therefore, a beginning to the universe itself. And so the observational astronomy of the 1920s and the evidence provided by Hubble, another colleague of his at Caltech named Humison, implied an expanding universe that was expanding outward from a definite beginning point.
And that blew everybody's mind.
It did, because throughout the 19th century, and really going back to Aristotle, the assumption of most philosophers and many scientists was that the universe was eternal and self-existent. And one of the leading astrophysicists at the time, Sir Arthur Eddington, who actually informed Einstein about the redshift evidence, still didn't like the idea that the universe had a beginning. He said, philosophically, the notion of the universe starting with a bang, he said, is preposterous. It leaves me cold. And a later astronomer explained why this was so upsetting to so many astronomers. He said, an infinitely old universe, this was Robert Dickey from Princeton, he said, an infinitely old universe would relieve us of the necessity of explaining the origin of matter at any finite time in the past. But if the universe has a beginning, we have to look to something beyond matter, beyond the material realm, beyond the physical realm of matter, space, time, and energy, as a cause of that beginning point.
Yeah. So the whole idea, the universe began at some time, was on the table. And all of a sudden, Albert Einstein comes along and he develops his general relativity theory that implied that the universe had a beginning. Explain how general relativity, which has to do with gravity, how that implied the universe all came back together.
Right. Well, Einstein actually developed his theory prior to these observational insights of Hubble. He was a little bit after Vesto-Slipher, but before Hubble. And his theory, it was the late 19-teens, was called general relativity. It was a theory of gravity. It was the idea that massive bodies actually curve or warp the fabric of space, or what he called space-time, because in Einstein's theory, space and time were connected in very important ways.